back to another episode of Out of the Blank Podcast. If you're new to the show, you're coming across the page, this is Don Jeffries. He's our guest today. We're going to be discussing JFK, which seems to be a topic of interest of late for a lot of people. We just had the hearings happen. Don, do you mind introducing yourself, and maybe we can go right into the hearings?
Yeah, no, it's great to be back with you, Robbie. And yeah, I think as I was watching the hearings yesterday, I was saying, I really, because people were saying, you think they'll call you? And I said, well, if they know about me, I've figured I have been researching this thing because I started out when I was very young. I was doing it when I was a teenager, and other than Robert Groden and Josiah Thompson, I think I have seniority in the community now. And so, when I'm watching this, I'm thinking, okay, well, these whippersnappers that came at, after I did. And so I've been, again, I worked as a volunteer for Mark Lane's Citizens Committee of Inquiry in the mid 70s, and we were trying to lobby the House to reopen the assassination. So that's how far I go back. So this is an old subject with me. I am very intrigued, though, that Congress is looking at it again.
I mean, how do you feel about it being an interest for a lot of people, but sadly it's being used as a political tool right now, as just ways to get attention, votes, or talk about other things? That whole hearing was literally talking about, why do we care about this? It's in the past. Let's focus on the CIA now, and that the things are still doing this, and then always relating something to Trump. It's like, hey, this is a JFK hearing. You said you're not here for conspiracy theories. Well, the evidence that we have to show you is not a theory. It's that the fact that there was a giant cover up.
Right. And the whole thing, as I said, when people talk about Mark Lane used to say that, and people say, well, what new evidence do you have? He said, the old evidence is perfectly fine. The original evidence shows there was a conspiracy. And all I say is, look, I don't know. I think Jefferson Morley was asked who the shooters were and stuff. And of course, we don't know that. But we do know that the shooter wasn't Lee Harvey Oswald. And that's where I start with is that, look, the crime was never honestly investigated. The Warren Commission wasn't an investigation, and I've written exclusively about that, how absurd the original critics showed that this was a bunch of mostly meaningless stuff. Jack Ruby's mother's dental charts and Oswald's pubic hairs, and they called as a witness a woman who had babysat the infant Lee Harvey Oswald and had no contact with the family ever since then. Now, you tell me that's a benign cover-up? You're seeking somebody that irrelevant out and having her as a witness when you didn't call a lot of the closest witnesses to the shooting. So that's why I have no tolerance for that. Obviously, this was a giant cover up from the beginning, and it was constructed to try to frame Lee Harvey Oswald, and who didn't shoot anybody. That's the one thing they proved. They didn't do any investigation, but they did prove, inadvertently, that whoever shot Kennedy, it wasn't Lee Harvey Oswald. So I start from that premise. They're lying. They lied to you. They're still, if you see yesterday in the hearing, some of them are still lying over 60 years later. So that, to me, that rules out the mob and anti-Castro Cubans and the small conspiracy. Because why would you be needing to lie for those figures? Castro outlived all of them and is dead. Why would you need to be lying about that now over 60 years later? Obviously, this is something, as we saw in the documents. The CIA's fingerprints are all over it, and I think the Pentagon's and lots of other powerful things as well.
I want to ask about, you said that they're still keeping the lie 60 years later. Do you think it's the people that were in that hearing that just weren't asking proper questions and deflecting it to something else? Or do you think it's because of the political motivations, and also a lot of people don't want to, I mean, you're part of a JFK hearing. There comes with the idea of conspiracy theorists behind it. And I think a lot of people try and shy away from that label when, in respectively, they should look at it in more of a sense of legal terms. The conspiracy to kill another individual is real legal language.
Yeah, no, and I think there was a lot of political posturing. But if you look at like this Jasmine Crockett, I've written a lot about her. I mean, just she's a real piece of work. But the pretend ghetto girl who was actually raised in a fairly upper class family and purposely sounds as stupid as she can. Which is I've no tolerance for people like that dumb themselves down to down, because that's how little respect I guess they have for their community. But she appeared to be, when she was questioning, she said, I don't want to go down the rabbit holes. And then the gist of her questioning was that Morley and Stone and Giuliani, all of us should be grateful that the CIA left any documents at all. She was basically saying, you should be grateful, aren't you glad that they didn't destroy all the documents? And I thought, where's that even coming from? That's the dumbest thing I've ever heard. It's like, okay, I mean, she obviously was her premise was that you can't look at the CIA because they didn't destroy all the documents. And it's like, so that's the extent of the Democrats. And you said the guy that we talked beforehand, and he did pay homage to Oliver Stone's bravery because Oliver Stone won, I think, the Purple Heart and something else, two of the biggest military honors you can. So he was no chicken hawk. And when he said that, but I don't know where he was going with this question because he clearly, he was going somewhere, and I think he just finally dropped it. I'm not sure he was talking about ambush and stuff, but that was the extent of, the other guy, the other Democrat that I saw was trying to, he kept trying to get Morley to admit that, so you think Lee Harvey Oswald fired some shots, right? I don't, that was the extent of their questioning of the Democrats. The Republicans, I think, did a pretty decent job, although they weren't that knowledgeable. Certainly, Lauren Boebert wasn't, and mixed up Roger Stone and Oliver Stone, but at least they had some interest. And again, you're talking about this is completely flip flopped from when I was lobbying Congress as a teenager in the mid '70s, because that we didn't think there were any Republicans that would be receptive at all to it, and we were trying to reach the Democrats, and a lot of them weren't. That was a big disillusionment for me because at that time I thought the Democrats were the good guys, and I was as left wing as you can be, card carrying. Remember the ACLU, and it was a real slap in the face to realize, God, they're not. Most of them aren't interested in this either, and they're lying about it too. So things haven't changed too much for the Democrats. What's really changed is the Republicans. So I think it's great to see somebody, Representative Luna, is really young, and for her to have this interest. I mean, maybe it's all politically inspired. I don't know. I'm not really sure, but I don't know what Trump can get out of it, from that. But you're right. They definitely spent time trying to go after Trump, which he had nothing at all to do with. His name shouldn't even have been mentioned. But that's what we have in today's politics.
I mean, just because you don't side with where a lot of the other researchers side on their political stance, because I mean, I wouldn't say you're right wing at all. I think you're more just not balanced, but I think you don't give as much shit to Trump as a lot of maybe the JFK researchers do. But I noticed with the hearing, when she started going into like Epstein files, Hunter Biden laptops type situations, I felt the air change, and I wasn't even in the room. Like I just knew from the JFK researchers I talked to, some of the specific ones that were on the panel or in that room, I realized that this is not where they side. And a lot of people would be shocked to know that as much as you can call research in the JFK assassination a right wing conspiracy now, it's the Democrats and the leftists that are looking into the case, old school ones, not the necessarily new ones. So I think that's a big shocker for a lot of people. But how was that for you? Because obviously, after she asked those questions, and they responded with, Jefferson Morley said, "I'm a liberal Democrat," and then mentioned that a couple of times. After he was done or answering questions, she just got up and left, and a lot of the members on the panel back there decided to get up and leave. There's only a couple more people still sitting back there.
Yeah, no, I don't think it was very well attended, and I was a little disappointed. It was because I guess that's all we're going to get is that one hearing, and I thought we'd have more and more mini members that chime in. And again, they don't have any interest. And you're right when they mention those other things, but that's something and that's a problem I have with the JFK research community. Why I'm persona non grata, because I talk about 9/11 and all these other things that most of them don't want to go there because they see things. I can't believe any of them still think the Democrats are good guys, but apparently some of them do. And and that's just incomprehensible to me. I don't think the Republicans are good guys, but the Democrats are beyond all hope. I mean, they're just, terrible people at this point, my old party. But I think the three people that were there, Jefferson Morley, who I was just on a show with him a few weeks back, the Union of the Unwanted. We do this podcast every once in a while. He was on there, and he was also on my television premiere a few years back on the Travel Channel. We did a show, and he was one of the panelists with me. So we're familiar with each other. He's obviously called for. He was on TV all over the place because he has the Washington Post background. So I guess maybe they think he's safe, but he is kind of an old line liberal. The fact he's interested in this, and he did say a couple times, I thought I came here to talk about the JFK assassination. He didn't want to go into the Trump nonsense, and that's a good. And Oliver Stone is very much like me. He's an old line liberal, and he's all over the place now. But I think he does align with the right on many things, like I do now, even though I'm not a conservative. And Eugenio is pretty much he's fairer than most of the people on the left are in terms of Trump. And so I'm a Trump agnostic. You said that, and that's people don't. I catch it from both sides, but it is what it is. I just don't hate or love him. I try to assess what he is, and I'm not going to go crazy. A lot of my friends do have Trump derangement syndrome, and I can't talk to them anymore because I say, you're letting this guy get inside your head, and you're going to, but the essence of Trump and why I call him Trumpenstein is when after these files are being released and he was bragging about them, and they did do a good job. Tulsi Gabbard, who I like, made sure that there were few, if any, redactions. And of course, you saw in the committee, the Democrats were, and they had a point, but I don't think that should have been the focus of the fact that they left the Social Security numbers in on these documents, which they're talking about. They were basically little memos about House Select Committee staffers, all unknown to us, and probably a bunch of them dead by now, I would imagine, but who wanted to, who were missing key passes or something like that to have access. So why those were ever classified in the first place, I don't know. But yeah, when they did release them, they should have redacted the Social Security numbers, if nothing else. But um, it is what it is. But that was the focus on too much of it. But it's a partisan thing. But Trump after the files were released, he gave an interview where he said, "I've always thought Lee Harvey Oswald did it." So it's like that. That's why I said that's why you can't place your faith in him, because he looks like he's on your side. He's on the side of truth, and then he does something like that. So that's why I remain a Trump agnostic, and I can't get worked up either way, because the people on the other side, they're a lot of them are just completely nuts, and they're so worked up over him. It's like, oh, he's a fascist, he's a dictator. Yeah, okay.
What are we associating right wing conspiracy theories that people are calling, you see the comments like certain subjects in the assassination where someone might say something, oh, I bet you believe the moon landing is a hoax, or I bet you believe this, or I bet you believe that. Have you found defines with right wing or what people are simulating right wing conspiracy theories to be in the case, specifically the case?
In this case, well, they're really, I mean, the right wing conspiracy theories used to be that the communists did it. And most of the conventional right now, but the right has changed because of Trump. He has had an impact on them, so there's a lot more populism there. People who aren't really conservative. And I bet if you that's why I say it's ridiculous that Trump is saying Oswald did it, when I bet probably 99% of the MAGA base thinks that there was a conspiracy. Whereas, I'm sure that's much higher than it would be now for the Democrats, because again, they're accepting, and Trump is looked at as somebody who's sympathetic to the conspiracy, even when he says that he doesn't. And that's just the way he's looked at dishonestly, right? But so maybe at this point, the left considers it a right-wing conspiracy theory. Which it makes no sense, because they're saying the CIA and the FBI and the Pentagon and people involved in it. And of course, Israel is mentioned a lot in those files too. And I think that the I'm not sure the left should be more receptive to that, because they're much more critical now of Israel than the right is. So I don't. It's very confusing, but I think they just throw right-wing conspiracy theories in there. Maybe from Hillary Clinton, and she claimed everything was a right-wing conspiracy, and certainly a lot of those right-wing conspiracy theories about other subjects happened during the '90s when Clinton was president, because you had so many. You had Waco and Oklahoma City and Vince.
But specifically in the JFK case, though, I want to bring you back to the JFK case. I don't want to talk about Trump anymore.
Yeah, no, I think in the JFK case, I don't know how you can call it a right wing conspiracy theory, because
No, like certain details, like Umbrella Man. I get that. I've made a bunch of clips about Umbrella Man. Everyone calls it a right wing conspiracy theory or some nonsensical thing.
no, because it was that conspiracy. The people that noticed Umbrella Man originally were the far left wing initial critics, people like R.B. Cutler, who was as far left as Mae Brussell. These were very very left wing people. Penn Jones, who talked about it. There was not a single critic back when I was first studying this that would be considered anything but far, far left wing. Nobody, they're the right wing. You had the John Birch Society and people like that who would sometimes say it was a conspiracy, but it was a communist conspiracy. But they would always say it was because Oswald was a communist, and Castro or Russia paid him to do it. That was basically their theory. But now to call, I mean, I don't even understand that. Umbrella Man has nothing to do with the right wing at all. But so yeah, I think it's just a convenient thing for you to say, well, that's just for somebody to say, well, that's a right wing conspiracy. No, it's not. It's part of the original JFK assassination. The critics, repertoire was that. But they've again, that's why it was interesting to see that Gary Underhill was mentioned, the CIA agent who was murdered. And that was in the realm of Penn Jones for a long time, and people like that, where it was discredited. Oh, it's another one of those, because the left today and the JFK researchers, they poo-poo any of the mysterious deaths. They don't think anybody was killed. That they think that, but again, that was part of the original lexicon. There is that there are mysterious deaths, and if you look at Executive Action, the movie in 1973 that was made, at the end of that, they have a montage of all the photographs of all the mysterious deaths they'd had so far. That was a big, again, what drew me to the subject. Umbrella Man and the mysterious deaths was among single bullet theory and all that too. But I don't know that you could call that right wing. But it's interesting that the files did show that Gary Underhill, that there were documents, official documents touching on that. That he was telling people, his fellow CIA officers, that we had a hand in this, and that he was murdered himself. So I don't, as you said, I don't discount any of this stuff. I don't initially say, well, that's been disproven. I don't think anything's been disproven, really. I mean, I, I, I don't think Bill, the driver, shot JFK. Maybe that's a right wing conspiracy theory.
That's the
I don't
right wing
know.
conspiracy doesn't actually mean the party of right wing. It would be more people that would believe that. What they're really saying is things that are the fantasy aspect in the case. I should have used that word, but fantasy things. I don't want to go off on right wing and left wing here because you got to think about the people who are listening to this. But I want to talk about things like mysterious deaths. I want to talk about the Umbrella Man. I want to talk about we can even talk about, I don't really want to talk about Jolly West, but we can talk about other things that would fit that out there criteria where if you're researching the case for a while, this is an area that you will come across. But it's like, if you're new to the case, you don't need to know necessarily all these, like the details about Umbrella Man. But did you believe that it was Stephen Louis Witt when he came forward? His testimony is very hard for me to buy exactly what he's selling.
Oh yeah, and I've in fact recently I started going back to the education forum. I don't know, they lured me back in. They were talking about my book, I think. So I went in there and just to try to set the record straight on that. But I've gotten an argument with people because it's amazing to me that the majority of the people, at least that post there, think that the badge that the Umbrella Man was Stephen Witt. And I remember again when he testified, I watched the hearings live back. They had some of the hearings on PBS, I think it was before C-SPAN back in the day. And it was a joke. I mean, it was so obvious what the HSCA was trying to do. They were trying to ridicule conspiracy theorists. At one point, Louis Stokes said, "Don't open that around me," because he was in reference to because it was an umbrella. The CIA had, and during the church committee hearings, we had learned that they had a weapon, an umbrella a gun in the form of an umbrella. So that was a play on that, how ridiculous it was for people to think that. But Witt's contention is he came out of nowhere and he claimed that I said that he was there. The reason he had an umbrella on a sunny day and he had it open was because he was protesting JFK's father's World War II policies, the appeasement policies with Neville Chamberlain. I thought, they're the average, even in 1963, no American is going to get that reference. And I said, so why didn't he have a sign? Wouldn't that make a lot more sense to say, your dad was an appeaser or something? Instead, he has an umbrella, and it just happens to be pumping. Oh, I had an argument with Josiah Thompson on reform where he said he wasn't pumping it. I said, you said it yourself back in the day. Everybody can see the movement going up and down, and he's stationed at a perfect spot. The gunfire begins exactly at that time. So I think he was some kind of a signal man. But this guy Witt, again, his testimony makes no sense. He claimed his view was blocked by the umbrella, which is ridiculous. His umbrella is held over his head. He's got a bird's eye view of everything. But this is what's wrong with the research community, that they accept the fact that I don't know who it was because they didn't try to. They said they found Oswald's infant's babysitter and people like that, but they couldn't locate who this guy was with an umbrella. And then him and the guy they called dark complected man after the assassination, everybody else is walking around, or they just calmly sit on the curb. You got photographs galore of them doing that. So to me, they're very suspect because of that. So, but no, I don't, and that's the problem with it. That would be one thing where they've handled it. They just simply say, no, this is Stephen Witt, and lots of good people that I used to think were good researchers. I can't believe they believe this guy. It's like, read the issues of the continuing inquiry. Penn Jones, I was one of the subscribers back. They published the first thing I ever wrote. That was the Bible of JFK researchers back then. That's where you went to before the internet, and they had lots of articles on it. talking about how ridiculous Stephen Witt's background and ridiculing his testimony. So I can't believe that people accept it now, but they do.
I'm going to share some of the story here just so we can have some people that might be new to the whole Umbrella Man thing to catch up on what we're talking about here. Play a couple clips. They're about a minute long each. This is the HSCA's investigation of Stephen Louis Witt. Now, if you want to go watch the full thing, you can watch his HSCA testimony on YouTube. It is about an hour and 45 minutes. I think the first 20 minutes they have Larry Sturdivant, maybe somebody else by a different name that was in front of him talking about photo analysis. I think it might be Mark something. I'm blanking on his last name. Mark Weiss. But this is the HSCA's kind of explanation of what the Umbrella Man is.
The Umbrella Man was one of the few spectators in Dealey Plaza who was not later identified. In fact, his identity has remained a secret to this day. When it studied all of the photographs taken in Dealey Plaza on November the 22nd, 1963, the committee discovered one taken by a life photographer in which the Umbrella Man can be seen from the front. It is moments after the president has been shot, and the man is sitting on a curb, his umbrella this time lying at his feet. The only problem was that he was off to the corner of the picture, and the image is tiny, unrecognizable in fact. Nevertheless, through photographic enhancement techniques, the committee was able to obtain a blow-up of the photo in which the Umbrella Man appeared clearly enough to be identified. It would be appropriate at this time, Mr. Chairman, to call Louis Stephen Witt.
Committee calls Mr. Witt.
I just want to say that photo of him, there was a dark spot, I think, under his nose right there. You know how many stupid ass comments out of this 458 are, is that Hitler or is that Edgar Allan Poe or is that some other stupid thing like that? I'm like, all right. Like, I get it. Like, they're like, you know, it's people living their life, I guess, but I don't know. To me, I was like, that's not what the purpose of this was. Now, this is Louis Stephen Witt's testimony, at least a gist of what the whole hour and a half was about. I'm going to put it into a minute. Basically, I don't remember is just like the key word that comes out of his whole testimony.
One of the gentlemen up there described me as being very cool. I'm afraid he was...
Well, I think your jaw's a little low in that picture to look cool. It looks to me like you're sort of...
I was definitely stunned. This is why that some things I don't remember. The things that I do remember are the things where there was repetition. The multiple shots, this person repeating themselves, the woman repeating herself, that sticks with me. If I said anything to the person sitting to my right, I don't recall what it was.
One of the strange things about this is assassination is that a few people write a few words about the picket fence or the retaining wall, and this committee's had to spend hundreds of thousands of dollars to try and find out what went on. They made a lot of money out of a few words, and we're spending money trying to figure out whether what they said was true or not.
Now, to be fair, on his point, that's Stuart McKinney. If this one plays properly.
Did you notice anyone or anything going on by the picket fence or by the retaining wall in Dealey Plaza, which up at the top of the grassy knoll? Did you see anyone peering over the fence or jumping over the fence or chasing anyone, or did you see anything or hear anything from that particular area?
No, sir, I did not, because at no point was I ever facing that direction.
In your own mind, that if a shot had come from the quote-unquote grassy knoll, picket fence, retaining wall area, that you would have been aware of where that shot had been come from, as in general you were not aware of where any of the shots came from, but that area was quite close to you.
I don't know if I would have been aware of a shot that would have come from the area that you mentioned or not.
It's an unfair question because it asks for an assumption, and I apologize for that. I know that I'm not a lawyer, so I'm allowed to get away with that sort of thing.
Now, I didn't mean to play it. Stuart McKinney, one second. Stuart McKinney is sharing the same kind of enthusiasm or attitude that a lot of the members on the HSCA started sharing 20 minutes into Louis Stephen Witt's testimony, because everything was, I can't remember. There was a really dumb excuse, which I mean, everyone already knows and puts in the comments, like he was protesting. He didn't know what he did. He was asked later by, I think it was Herbert or Harold S. Sawyer, who has like a Southern accent, which is pretty funny. But he even asked him, he was like, have you ever protested before? And he goes, no. He goes, so this is your first time protesting ever? This isn't like a common thing for you to go down there? Then he refuses to test the umbrella in court when the HSCA asked him to. He made a statement saying he didn't want to because he didn't want to embarrass himself or his family anymore. They asked him why he didn't come forward, and he goes, it wasn't until years later people were saying I should come forward and talk about it. That was me, and this type of thing. He was just casually talking about it at work. So the real thing there is that there was a person with an umbrella that was pacing back and forth, did look at the knoll, definitely went down there. He even later states in his testimony that he sat by the knoll before the motorcade came and then went down there and did that. He also stated he didn't know JFK was coming through Dealey Plaza or coming through that area. He said that's just normally where he takes his walks, but can't identify any of the buildings that are around with him. There's a lot of issues with his statement. The issue also is that the HSCA concluded or thought enough to make him come into court and claim to be the umbrella man. Not a conspiracy, just they didn't look at his testimony more and be like, all right, they already didn't believe the umbrella gun thing. It was put forward by a researcher, but at the same time, it was less than a couple months later, we had the church committee come out with the heart attack gun and other things that probably would have made that umbrella dart gun thing a little bit more serious in the question of things.
Yeah, that was, and again, the fact that he's saying he didn't know JFK was going to be coming through Dealey Plaza, but he came there to protest him. Then what were you there for with the umbrella? The whole idea supposedly was you in a very convoluted, apparently umbrellas were related to Neville Chamberlain. I don't even know how, but in some way. But that the average, if I don't really understand it, the hidden history I write, I don't understand the connection. How is the average citizen in 1963? How are they going to get the point of your protest? If you're protesting something, don't you want people to know what you're protesting? And as somebody pointed out, he hadn't protested before. And I wrote on the forum recently that, you're talking about something that happened, that would have been the late 30s, I guess, the Neville Chamberlain. So you're talking about at least 25 years. So you didn't feel compelled to protest at all, but you went on the day JFK was assassinated, and yet you said you didn't know he was going to be there. So yeah, he's a laughing stock of a witness, and it shocks me that a lot of credible researchers now actually believe that he was the umbrella man. Again,
like we started off on the beginning of the show talking about the hearing recently with Oliver Stone, Jim DiEugeno, and Jefferson Morley, and how quickly it turned into not a joke, but a more turnaround of events when it came to talking about more modern day politics rather than the actual event of the JFK assassination. This is the same thing that happened with the HSCA. The HSCA turned the umbrella man situation from the first 10 minutes of it being seriously to 15 minutes of, okay, I'm not buying what he's selling, for 20 minutes of let's just kind of get through this as much as we possibly can. And they turned it into a joke. They did the same thing with the mysterious deaths. Jacqueline Hess only gets 13 minutes to investigate the mysterious deaths, and she only analyzed 21 witnesses. The only smart questions that were asked were, why didn't you include George de Mohrenschildt on your suspicious death list? And they even said, we'll submit our findings and how we calculated all this at the end, and you'll have those ready for you. Do we get those reports? No. How can you calculate that in general, the odds of that? I mean, it's looking at it on paper, you hear how all these people died, whether it was Johnny Roselli, Santos Trafficante, that could have been mob hits, or people just having heart attacks or dying in a single car crash or suicides. You can't calculate it with anything. It's suspicious for sure. It's just a moral thing. Does that sound right? Like that type of deal? You can't really use a statistic to calculate that at all. The executive action tossed out, I think, 1 to 1 billion or something. And then articles later, like the London Sunday Times tossed out articles later that were talking about 1 to 100,000, 1 to 500,000. It's like, there's not really a way you can statistically factor in the fact that whatever they could have been killed as or whatever could have happened. But one question that was asked by Harold Ford Sr. during the Stephen Louis Witt thing that I thought was really interesting, and it's this right here. So the HSCA, in my opinion, did great work with really kind of asking good questions. And this is like one guy that was kind of not dealing with the nonsense discussion.
You kept that umbrella at your home or your business place or someplace. Is that correct?
Yes, uh-huh.
And just looking at it, even though I know it flapped over when the young lady opened the umbrella up a minute ago, why did you keep it 15 years?
The only reason I can figure out it's lasted this long is because of the size you take this thing out and it's big and it's clumsy. Whereas I had other umbrellas and would wear a raincoat or something that would take the use off.
How many umbrellas? You see, you have others. How many do you have?
I have no idea. Over the years, I would have no idea.
Do you think you could have picked up the wrong one and brought here from Dallas?
It's quite possible. The only reason I believe almost 100% that is the very same umbrella is the fact that it is a big umbrella, and I'm almost positive that's the one.
And then I forget, I think it's the next clip.
In your house, there are 2, 3, or 4 umbrellas there in your house. Is that correct?
I wouldn't know how many is there. There's some in the back closet. I usually have one in the car. The other day I stumbled over one in the garage where these things
came.
But you
did not identify that one 15 years ago, so I'm going to keep this umbrella here.
No. At that particular time, I placed no significance on that umbrella.
Did you go to your closet and say, well, I can identify this particular umbrella, and this is the one that I had on November 22nd of 1963?
Yes, when Mr. Moriarty was at my house there in Dallas, and he asked me if I still had the umbrella. I said, yes, I have an umbrella that I believe is the exact same umbrella.
You didn't have to look at the other umbrellas in your closet?
No, the other umbrellas, I believe, are little stubby things.
In your house?
One more, and then we'll be back.
There are 2, 3, or 4 umbrellas there in your house. Is that correct?
I wouldn't know how many is there. There's some in the back closet. I usually have one in the car. The other day I stumbled over one in the garage.
That's the same
so you
thing.
buy a lot of umbrellas, is that right?
No, not particularly. And I'm 53 years old. You collect a lot of stuff in that particular time. Umbrellas are not a particular hobby of mine. It's just that over the years, although God knows it may seem that it is.
Mr. Witt, what do you think an umbrella is used for? Is it used to keep the sun off you, the rain off you, to match your top coat or something?
Well, an umbrella, I'm sure, can be used for many things. I'm sure you'd use it to keep the rain off, keep the sun off. In this case, you can use it to, as I did, for that purpose that I named.
There are 2, 3, or 4 umbrellas there.
He asked him, and I think it's probably the next clip right after this one, but he asked him, he goes, you really like umbrellas, don't you? Because he kept asking him, because he asked him multiple times the same question. He goes, how many umbrellas do you own? How many umbrellas do you own? He would just keep doing that, and the answer would be different. So that's the thing, is like what I really appreciate about the HSCA investigating this, because in my opinion, everything, no matter how ridiculous it was, I mean, compared to the church committee hearings when we're looking at assassination plots, we're looking at so much that was exposed. The CIA heart attack gun, I mean, ways to kill people with Black Leaf 40 by injecting them with a syringe. Like, this is stuff that was all lied about and hidden and put in the cloak of darkness.
Yeah, no, and I again, I remember watching that stuff, and it was just my impression that there were, I don't even remember that there were any good members on the committee in terms of people that were obviously out to get to try to find the truth, because we were very disillusioned in the fact that they didn't have Robert Groden was some kind of a photographic consultant, but he was really the only one that I know that was on there that was from our community. But watching that again, it just amazes me that he doesn't come off as credible. And I don't know, people were saying, well, do you think he's part of some conspiracy? I said, well, no, I don't think he was the umbrella man. So no, I don't. Why they picked him out, as I understand it, if I remember right, I could have this wrong, David Lifton's dentist or something was involved in referring Witt and saying this guy talks. I think I might be, but I know it was David Lifton and a dentist. Maybe Witt was a dentist, but that's how he supposedly came forward all those years later. And the House committee ended up questioning. But I think it's a small point in the overall context. But when you have somebody acting that suspiciously, the only one with an umbrella there, pumping it up and down, having it again, he wouldn't protect. It wasn't a warm day. To be protecting yourself from the sun, that's ridiculous. Nobody does that. And then afterwards to be sitting down and being so conspicuous on the curb and saying, if I said anything to, why was that guy sitting next to him? Why? They obviously had to know each other. Why were they together? And he said, if I said anything to him, I don't remember what it was. It's like, but there was never an investigation. So at the time, they should have been able to try to figure out who these guys were, but
This
they
is the
didn't.
man you're mentioning, the dark complected man that I think it's
Yes,
still
yes.
unidentified, just like the Japanese reporter that was in the basement and all of Dow's headquarters all weekend that we don't have a name on.
The person sitting beside you has been alleged to have been a Cuban, and that other pictures taken in the plaza suggested that he may have been talking on a two-way radio while he was sitting beside you.
Looks like a two-way radio to me.
I wish that I could give you more information, but I'm sorry I can't. Now, as for him talking on a
two-way radio.
A two-way radio while sitting beside me, I feel sure that I would have been aware of that. As the picture shows it, I feel sure that I would have known if they were holding, because those walkie-talkie things are fairly large. They're certainly bigger than a person's hand. I feel like that I would have remembered that.
I'm just saying, like I said, there's things that were not investigated properly that should have been, and this is why they continue to go farther. It's the reason why they decided to open up the umbrella in court in the first place, to prove that it wasn't a DART thing, only because they were afraid that if they didn't, then there's going to be lingering questions and things that were going to be criticized later. I understand that. The HSCA did good work, but again, much like with every discussion of the JFK assassination, you have to look at things. You kind of can't just be like, that's a right-wing conspiracy theory. You have to actually analyze it, and if you look, there are two people there that are unidentified. I don't think that Beverly Oliver's the Bashuka lady or whatever, Babushka lady. Sorry, I don't think the ankles match. I think Tim Smith is right about that, but I think there's a lot of things that are not red herrings in the case or just throwaways. I think they're things that were never figured out, and we've just somehow allowed people to claim them or do something where this is them and then they get attention for it, write books about it and stuff like that, which becomes a problem when you're trying to really analyze the case. So we obviously have to go through a lot of things I wouldn't call right-wing conspiracies. I would just call fringe things that were never figured out in the first place, and trying to decipher how do we get this disconnected from the whole topic of the JFK conversation.
Right. No, and what you have, you then you develop really what I think are absurd theories. Like, again, I think Bill Greer, I think he was a conspirator, and he should have been the first witness questioned in a real investigation. What are you doing here? Why are you stopping the 59 people say you stopped the limo or almost stopped it? What is this? Is this you're following protocol here? But he wasn't a shooter, right? That makes no sense that you would. And you have people, you have somebody thinks the Mark North wrote a book about Secret Service fatal error, accidentally. That's ridiculous. I mean, you have people that think Jack Valenti was a shooter. And again, I think that's ridiculous. He was a presidential advisor, and you have another guy I had on my show who I like. I'm not going to mention his name, who thinks George H.W. Bush was a shooter. Now, you can argue that maybe he was involved, but I mean, those are, and then the most ridiculous one, I have people that are my fans on Substack that have tried to tell me that Jackie Kennedy shot him.
I think they're tackling it from the, what do you call it? The JFK cheating aspect, and they think that Jackie was trying to get like one final shot in or some crap. Which, look, I'm not going to say it's ridiculous, but I just think that's definitely not what happened. I mean, if you know what that family was going through at that time, I mean, I think didn't Jackie just lose a baby a little bit before she came to Dallas, and that's why the flowers were changed as well too?
Yeah, exactly. But I mean, the idea that, again, when you say that, I consider, and then you had the people, and there's a lot, I forget the guy's name. People want me to interview him all the time. He's made a film about it, but that think that it was faked, that the JFK assassination didn't happen. And again, I think a lot of things are fake, and I'll consider, but I tell you, I can't go there because that repudiates my entire life's work, 50 years of worth of work. If none of this is real, then I don't know why we're analyzing anything. But that means that why were none of the deaths real that were associated with RFK, MLK, any of these stuff, JFK Jr. So that's the problem, is you have people that have, well, I think those are outrageous theories, but they try to throw everything into there. So it becomes an outrageous theory to say that the government, actually covered up, that the autopsy photos aren't real. But we have to base that on what the evidence was of the Parkland doctors, who all reported a giant blowout in the back of JFK's head. The autopsy photographs don't show that. So either all those guys were lying or incompetent and wrong to the same degree, or the autopsy photos aren't legitimate. But That's what they just, oh, come on. So yes, I am. Obviously, that's what I'm suggesting. What is the alternative? So that gets thrown into, Jackie killed him. So I think that, we have to be, but I'm polite to everyone. If everybody says it, that's fine. And there are good people that believe that Bill Greer shot him that I agree with on a lot of other things. But I said, I just think you would come up with first of all, a better plan than that, but again, what do I know? I said, all I'm willing to say is that they lied to you about it and Oswald didn't do it, whatever happened.
I want to ask you about things that can get lumped into the conspiracy or dismissed claims because of the fact that there might have been little investigative procedure into it, that it gets lumped into the whole wildish, outlandish theories. And one name that does come up, and it's one that I've kind of looked into a little bit only because one of my favorite actors played him in a movie, John Candy. So I want to talk about Dean Andrews. Your perspective, maybe you can explain a little bit about who Dean Andrews is. I mean, you wrote a book dealing with Dean Andrews as well, too, amongst other things. So I'm hoping maybe we can educate some other people out there on this guy and what you think his claims are valuable.
Yeah, well, I think he's a very important witness, and he's overlooked often by people because Jim Garrison is overlooked, and that was what John Barber, my friend, was incensed that Garrison wasn't mentioned during the hearing because he thinks Garrison is the key to everything, and certainly he played an important role. But I did write a book with William Law, another great researcher, called "Pipe the Memo and Read," and Dean Andrews, Jim Garrison, the conspiracy to kill JFK. And it was the reason I was compelled to write it is because I've been good friends. In fact, I just took him out to lunch last week. Again, Dean Andrews III, who was my brother's best friend, and I met him through him. And there are some coincidences in life. He just came to Virginia and hit it off with my brother, and I couldn't believe it. I said, "Wow, that's Dean Andrews Jr.'s son." And so sometimes things do happen coincidentally, but he and I have hit it off very well. He's as fascinated by me being involved with research as I am with him. But his father was a beatnik lawyer, and John Candy did a good job playing him, who had some very curious lingo. And if you're reading the hearings and exhibits as I did, most of it is not entertaining or informative. But Dean Andrews Jr.'s testimony before the Warren Commission is the gold medal. It's above all. It's just the most interesting. And from his beatnik lingo to saying, I got to find out who really shot the president. And it's fascinating stuff. But Andrews would be thrust into the case because he claimed that he received a phone call on the afternoon of November 22nd. He was in the hospital at the time, and he received a phone call from Clay Bertrand. And of course, that would end up, Garrison would say that was Clay Shaw's alias. And from there, he called him. He wanted Andrews to represent Lee Harvey Oswald as his attorney, and that made sense because Dean Andrews was his attorney. He represented him over the summer, along with a lot of the anti-Castro Cuban figures who I think were all, put in Oswald's orbit as part of his intelligence operation to manipulate him and later frame him as the patsy. But it was basically stuff about his wife's immigration status and everything. But that was the only lawyer that Oswald had. So why Clay Bertrand would have been calling him, I don't know. That's a good question. But clearly that's what got Jim Garrison's attention, was that he knew Dean Andrews III. Dean Andrews III told me that, that Garrison would call their house all the time. Him and his father were really good friends. And so he heard about this guy. I know Dean Andrews. What is he doing talking about? He got a phone call to represent Lee Harvey Oswald. That's what's got him started down the path with Clay Shaw. So he's incredibly important witness. And I know from knowing Dean III, we have a lot of insights. We have interviews with him in the book, but his father definitely believed there was a conspiracy behind the scenes, and his father went, pretty much crazy. Eventually, he was so paranoid. He was locking his young son out of the house because he thought they were going to get him, and his marriage almost broke up. And his career as a lawyer, they were very influential people in New Orleans. He headed up the New Orleans Jazz Festival and everything. All that was gone. And his wife, I'm the only person that interviewed his wife. We had her over for dinner with Dean III about 20 years ago, and she thought I said, look, your husband wasn't nuts. This was a real thing. And I tried to convince her but their life was destroyed because of it. So you couldn't really get past that they had a great life. And because he got thrust into this again, out of that phone call. And I ask all the time, I don't know why more people don't try to figure out, why did he get that phone call? Why was he called? And I still don't know that we know the answer, but Dean Andrews III has a lot of interesting things that we talk about in the book about his father. His father was had ties to Carlos Marcello, and as well as just some kind of he had interesting ties to the people in terms of Ferry and the anti-Castro Cubans, Guy Bannister, all the people that Oliver Stone talks about in JFK, which I think in our book, as we talk about, I think that was a New Orleans ground level plot that all these figures, they probably were worked against each other. They may have all been told the same thing. I think Oswald was told, hey, this is your assignment. You're infiltrating this plot. They're planning to kill the president. And we know that Oswald was probably the guy that stopped the Chicago plot at the Army-Navy game in early November, because somebody named Lee from the FBI called in and said, hey, there's going to be an assassination attempt on JFK at the Army-Navy game, and that stopped it. Most of us think that was what was Lee Harvey Oswald. So, but yeah, Dean is in it, and not the least of which, and people know instantly when I tell them who he is. You remember John Candy played his dad? Oh yeah, yeah. So they remember that because he's one of my favorites too. So I think he's an overlooked character.
What do you think about Perry Russo sinking the whole Jim Garrison and Dean Andrews kind of claims? It seems like just because I think they flip flop back and forth that they were drugging Perry Russo or something like that. That's why I'm curious about why his claims are so dismissed, because Garrison gets a lot of crap, and I think it might be unnecessarily. But I would like to get your kind of interest or just thoughts on it.
Well, he was left with Perry Russo because he was pretty much the last man standing. I mean, Garrison, he had lots of people who were scared that wouldn't come to testify. He had almost unprecedented. You had governors of several states, including Ronald Reagan in California, and ironically, John Connally in Texas, several states who wouldn't extradite really important witnesses so that he could depose them for his investigation. So, and then you had people dying left and right. His star witness was David Ferry, who of course was killed. And the same day, Eladio Del Valle, who was one of the mysterious anti-Castro Cubans, was found with a hatchet through his head. So, and Dean Andrews Jr. got the message. He said, they can squash me like a bug. And he was terrified they were going to kill him. And that's why he turned and, lied basically to try and said things he knew weren't true. But it was so Garrison was left with Russo, who was, he was, first of all, Russo hated JFK. Absolutely hated him. And that's why it was one of the cool things Oliver Stone did. He used real people. So he used the real Perry Raymond Russo, who hadn't died yet, in the scene where JFK's death is announced and Russo's angrily said, yeah, they should have shot the son of a bitch or whatever. That's really Perry Raymond Russo saying that. And that was really his beliefs. But he didn't want a lie to come out. So Garrison used it. And of course, Russo is important because he claimed that Walter Jenkins of NBC News, Walter Sheridan of NBC News, who did a lot of dishonest reporting. And as far he had been an aide to Robert F. Kennedy. And as far as I know, the beginning and end of his journalistic career was working as NBC News to try to discredit Garrison. They had that white paper on it was so one-sided they had to give Garrison equal time. But Russo claimed that Sheridan tried to bribe him. And basically, and Garrison claimed he had it on tape. I've never been able to find out where the tape is, but that's what Garrison claimed. And we recently during these file releases, Garrison was back in the news again, and they didn't say anything about it during the hearings, but where it was, there was an FBI memo that came out now that talked about Garrison having documentation that Lee Harvey Oswald used Jack Ruby as a reference for work. Employment in the summer of 1963. So Garrison had a lot of great stuff, and all his files, some of his files are missing, some of them haven't been released. So I think we need to pay more, not to the point of John Barber, where I think he was the only thing, but I think he was very important. And Dean Andrews Jr., I think his significance in this case is very real. And unfortunately, it was never cleared up as to why he was called that day in the hospital, why they picked him, because he didn't cooperate out of fear. So we probably never know.
What about his fluid recollections?
Well, yeah, I think that was part of his fear, where he was changing his story constantly, because he talked about Clay Bertrand. He described, Clay Shaw was a very tall guy, And he described him at one point as being tall. Then he described him again as being, I think, 5'8" or 5'9" or something. So, that was the problem. He did, but again, Dean Andrews, he was scared for his life, and he was saying whatever they wanted him to say. And if you look at Marina Oswald's testimony, geez, I mean, you're talking about people that fluid recollections. I mean, they were trying to, and something like Stephen Witt, we just talked about, the government was so desperate to prove really an unprovable case that they were willing to take, really fanciful testimony, even though it contradicted earlier testimony. Certainly in Dean Andrews' case, it did. And that's why eventually Andrews would be, Garrison would get him for perjury on just one of the many lies he told.
Can I ask you about Harold Weisberg in New Orleans? You talk about it in the first chapter of your book.
Yeah, well, Weisberg, he was a hero of mine. Mark Lane, and ironically, Mark Lane and Weisberg hated each other. But so, these feuds in the research community go back to them. I mean, I don't know why they hate. I think Weisberg was, I have so much admiration for him because he did great work, unheralded work. He couldn't get his books published. And I had dinner at his house and met him and his wife and, his little old lady that, she typed out on an old fashioned typewriter, typed out his manuscripts, and he sold them himself before anybody published themselves. And I bought them all through him. And I just had so much respect for the guy, but he had a really unlikable personality. He was a grumpy old man. And he hated everybody. He hated almost all the other critics, and he especially hated Lane. He was jealous of Lane because Lane was like the rock star of the critic community. He got on TV, and he was the darling on the college campuses. And Weisberg, got on radio shows, but he had to publish his stuff himself. Lane made a lot of money with Rush to Judgment. So I can see why he felt the way he did. But and with me, I had to be careful what I said to him because he would snap at you in a second. He was a real irascible guy. And but you can't deny the work he did. I mean, post-mortem is still, as good as anything ever written on the medical evidence, even though it's dated. And photographic whitewash, we talk about some of the films. Nobody else had a book like that where he talked about I still try to track some of them down, and you can't. All the people that were taking film in Dealey Plaza that day, they've been forgotten. And, Weisberg tabulated and put them all into a book. He published the first one, the January 27th, 1964 transcript of the Warren Commission, which was very significant. He published that as another edition of Whitewash. He was the first one to really talk about Marina Oswald's changing testimony. So he can be credited with a lot of things. He was, and some of his criticisms of Lane were correct. Like Lane didn't refer to the councils by name. Weisberg focused on Arlen Specter and David Bell and all those people, Wesley Liebler, who did the work for the commission members did almost nothing, where Lane would just refer to them as unnamed councils and concentrate on the commission members. So I admire, but then Weisberg again, and we talk in the book about how he changed, and he continued to be jealous. And when he turned on Garrison for I don't know unknown reasons, as you know in the book, I use his book Oswald New Orleans a lot because he did the original groundbreaking investigation, and he basically set the template. His work was the foundation for Garrison's investigation, and he worked with him initially, but for whatever reason, and I don't know if it was, again, jealousy or what, Weisberg would just snap on people in a second and break off relationships. And that's what happened with Garrison. And to such an extent that, to his everlasting shame, when Oliver Stone's JFK came out, he was bitter. I think he was jealous that Stone didn't cast him as the hero instead of Garrison. I really think that's what it was. But he leaked an advanced copy of Oliver Stone's script. The film it was an early copy, too. To Parade magazine, to George Lardner of all people, who was one of the Operation Mockingbird journalists for the Post, and that was part of the original attempt to smear Stone before his film even came out. So Weisberg's a complex character. I give him credit for all the great work he did, and he did do a lot of great work. The guy trudged. When I met him, I went and picked him up in D.C. because he didn't drive. He had phlebitis in his leg. He was already old, and he trudged into D.C. I think he took a bus or a taxi every day to DC from Frederick, Maryland. It was like an hour and a half away, and just to file Freedom of Information Act lawsuits. And so he deserves a lot of credit, but he epitomizes the JFK research community and their really difficult personalities.
What do you do when it comes to all these different personalities that get involved in something like this? I mean, how do we untangle it just so people that are new can sort fact from fiction and kind of, it's not necessarily teaching critical thinking, but it's just looking at certain things of evidence and not drawing massive conclusions. I have a lot of people that are mentioning books by authors, certain details or excerpts from interviews and stuff like that. And I'm like, it's like the JFK signing the Vietnam thing to pull out troops or something like that. I've heard that we have a signature that JFK signed it, but do we have a paper that shows that he did that? Because I'd like that paper because I can't find one.
You're talking about National Security Action Memorandum 263?
Yeah, do we have a proof that he signed it?
Oh, yeah, I think so. I mean, he talked about that in his last press conference.
But is it, I know, but is it just talk? I mean, again, we're basing things on future thought of if he would have pulled out or not. I mean, I don't know what he would have done. I'd like to think he would have, but
well, I think it had to have been signed. I mean, I don't know. I haven't looked for a signature, but I know
because there isn't one. There isn't one. That's the thing. There isn't one. I've looked. There isn't one. It's just someone that he signed it, and then it doesn't exist. It's like, do we have photos of Jack Ruby or Lee Harvey Oswald seeing each other? I don't think they ever knew each other. But if Garrison has this, but we don't have that paper, you can't. That's not like, to me, that just messes with the case more. I don't have evidence now. I need to see a document. I need to see a source code. I need to see something that's not from somebody's book.
Well, I have to get more on 263 for you, but I mean, I know that in his last press conference, JFK himself was answering a reporter's question and talking about withdrawing from Vietnam. And he had told all of his advisors, every single one of them, he said the same thing, and 263 said we're going to get 1,000 people out by the end of 63 and all troops out by 1965. So I think it's clear that's what he was going to do. But, and then that's why I think McGeorge Bundy was a conspirator, because he wrote National Security Action Memorandum 273 the day of the assassination. And it talked about, basically defending the Vietnamese and South Vietnamese and escalation, and as I said, JFK would have never, I can't believe he didn't sign the other one, but he never would have signed this one because it contradicted what he was doing. He probably would have fired McGeorge Bundy on the spot. And the fact that he wrote it, I think McGeorge Bundy knew he wasn't going to be alive to see it. But I have to look at that. I don't know. I'll have to. We should ask Oliver Stone about that.
Well, it's even like if we look at the RFK thing, a lot of the weight gets put behind him about saying he was going to reopen the investigation into his brother's death. But I don't have I know that's what I'm saying is that's what I would really like to see, more solid based evidence. I think that's what the one guy in the hearing that was asking Morley if there was any concrete evidence of Oswald and the CIA orchestrating this plot or something like that, or having some type of connection. That's what he was hinting at, was seeing something more solid based. But he kept asking him over and over again, which was getting kind of annoying because obviously there are just a lot of evidence to. Really, the whole point here is there's a lot of evidence to support that the original picture that the Warren Commission painted is not accurate. If anything, there needs to be major adjustments to it. And I think at that basis alone, that gives you enough to go off of to want to dig deeper and look into some of these investigative agencies. But again, people making claims that Oswald and Ruby were at the carousel together. And I don't have any evidence for that besides maybe one person, Bill DeMar, and then I think something in Judith Very's book. I need a little more.
Well, you read in hidden history. I have lots of accounts of that. There was again, but it's all testimony. You're right. I mean, nothing's going to be on paper. I mean, you have Rose Sheremy, who I've interviewed her son on my show. In fact, I got Sally Kirkland, the actress.
Did she say she saw Jack Ruby and Lee Harvey Oswald at the club? Because I don't remember her statement being that.
Rose Sheremy said they were lovers. She said they were bedmates. That was her famous line.
Dude.
And
it's like Sam Pate in his oral history interview saying that Bill Decker and Jack Ruby were giving each other sexual favors. I'm like, I don't know what's going on, dude.
I don't either, but there's references to gays everywhere, and I don't know what that means, but there is references to that. But they and you had Bill DeMar. And you had there was a guy, I published it in I think it was Hidden History that I published, where there's a reference to Ruby bringing Oswald's car again, or Oswald. Oswald, of course, didn't drive. Sometimes, I mean, the record is unclear on that as well. but they're mixed up in some kind of thing with that as well by somebody. Again, somebody, and then the guy died real young who said it. So I don't remember the details, and I apologize for that. But there are several. And Ruby strippers, a couple of his strippers said that, at least one or two of them, were part of the body count as well that talked about Ruby knowing Oswald. I think it's pretty. And you had the guy Carol Jarnigan, who has been forgotten. He was an attorney that overheard. He was sitting in a restaurant and he overheard people he identified as Oswald and Ruby talking about doing something upcoming.
I saw a paper on that, but it said subject, not Carol Jargon.
Yeah,
like it was unnamed. It was just said subject.
Yeah, that's him. He was an attorney. So again, this is the problem: is that with any of this stuff, that's why I tell people when they talk about a smoking gun, I don't think you're going to find a document somewhere that says, "Hey, yeah, we're doing this. This is what we're doing. And this is who involved." So you have to go by that. Like Morley was talking about. He's saying that that Angleton recruited Oswald into the CIA out of the Marines at age 20. And he's talking about that file 150 that he kept holding up 198 pages. And the one person said, "Do you," basically saying, "Is there any evidence that Angleton saw it?" Because he has the word of Angleton's secretary that it was there. So basically they're saying, "Well, that's Angleton's secretary." So the inference is they're so anxious to avoid any connection that they're going to say, "Well, okay, Oswald is tied to Angleton's secretary, but not him directly." So yeah, so he was involved with Angleton's. I mean, it gets to be. You have. I just was talking about. I found a file in these recent releases where it was Oswald's superintendent or supervisor at not at Sugi base. I think it was El Toro out in California, but where he again basically said Oswald had a top security clearance and he was doing really top secret work. So that's all we can go on is the people saying these things and say something like George de Mohrenschildt. George de Mohrenschildt, just the fact that he was Oswald's best buddy. He was old enough to be his father. And de Mohrenschildt had ties to Jackie Kennedy's family. He bounced little baby Jackie on his knee and dated Jackie Kennedy's mother. So he was an aristocrat. What is he doing hanging around with it? And he was a white Russian. What is he doing becoming best friends with a guy young enough to be his son who was a defector and apparently a commie and was a minimum wage earning guy? I mean, you've been around, I'm sure, long enough to understand that, but I certainly have. That's not, people don't become friends. That doesn't make, unless he's interested sexually in Oswald or something. There's not going to be, you're never going to make that connection with somebody from de Mohrenschildt's world connected to somebody who's working a minimum wage job. Not going to happen. But in this case, de Mohrenschildt was all over him. I don't know if he was his handler or what, but I mean, you look at those kind of connections and you realize Oswald, when he came back from the defector program, probably fake defector program, he wasn't even briefed by the CIA at the height of the Cold War. So that's why people ask all these questions about it. But yeah, it's not going to be. You have the testimony of the witnesses, the husband and wife team, their name escapes me now, in the 70s, who talked about Oswald had his 201 file, and that it was so well known in the CIA, everybody talked about it at cocktail parties in the CIA. I can't remember their name now, but they, so I don't know, maybe all those people are wrong. I don't know. They didn't, and contrary to the one guy who said from the HSCA that people make money, I can testify to you that maybe Mark Lane and David Lifton made money on their books, but nobody else made much money. Certainly anybody writing a pro-conspiracy book today is not making much money. Jim Douglas maybe, because Oliver Stone held his book up, but the rest of us are not making money doing this.
What do you think about certain leaps that you would make in the case when it came to not having evidence?
Leaps? I don't make the leaps. I mean, that's why I say I don't speculate. I mean,
we're all assuming that it's a military-industrial kind of plot here. We all assume it's one of the agencies or a combination of agencies in and out.
I think that's a logical assumption. But all I'm willing to do to state definitively is that the official story is impossible. They, while trying to frame him, they inadvertently proved Lee Harvey Oswald couldn't have shot him. So we know Oswald didn't do it. So, and they keep saying he did. and he has these strange connections everywhere, which don't make any sense. So, of course, you can draw the logical conclusion that he was some kind of an agent. He was framed for it. I believe, like Jim Garrison did, that he was on assignment at the time, and that's how they framed him. They got him into the midst of these cast of characters so they could use it to manipulate him and then frame him. I think, but I can't prove that, but I think that that's what it was. And again, when you just look at what has happened in the 60 years since, where you still have people desperately, and when you're watching the Democrats in that hearing, desperately trying to, to still suggest, is that Jasmine Crockett saying, the CIA is, basically you should be grateful the CIA didn't destroy all the documents. Like what? I mean, I don't. She's certainly not a conspirator, but does she just recognize it's in her best interest to say this? Does she and the Democrats think that somehow this would credit Trump so that they have to go against it because Trump is the one who released the files? I don't know. I don't know what their motivation is, but you're still getting the same kinds of attitudes out of most of these people that I've seen going back to the 70s, because I recognized it then that if I was starting to develop my mindset, and I was like, wow, I don't understand this. Look at the way they're acting. Look at the questions they're asking, and look at the way they're emphasizing all these strange things. So I don't know. I don't theorize at all. I think it's pretty obvious that there was a huge conspiracy only because they're still covering it up over 60 years later. So I think that indicates there are some very powerful forces involved.
Don, I appreciate the time you gave me to talk on my show about some of these areas. I know it was kind of spur of the moment type thing of what I wanted to talk about on you, but I knew you would be more balanced in wanting to cover other certain things. I mean, how do you feel about researchers that kind of avoid certain areas? I mean, I try and avoid some things, but obviously there's a lot of things that don't want to get discussed in the research community because they're taboo or they're controversial, which makes the whole damn case controversial.
Yeah, no, it is, and I don't think you can. I know a lot of the research didn't want to touch Israel for a long time, but I mean, I don't know what that means. But in the documents that were released, I mean, we know there was an FBI memo that I saw, and written on the bottom was that the CIA is fine with releasing all this information except bracketed areas. And then the guy that posted it, all the areas that were bracketed had to do with Israel. Now, as I say, I don't think Israel, was able to coordinate all this, by itself. But why would the CIA have any interest in not having Israel mentioned? Now, we do know that Angleton was at the heart of the conspiracy. I think his name is all over this, and Angleton was their man. He had strong. In fact, I think he has a monument in Israel to him. He was that connected to Israel and the Mossad. So, and he apparently is the one that recruited Oswald. And so there's some kind of a connection there. And they used to smear Michael Collins Piper, who wrote the book Final Judgment years ago. And and now they're all saying the same thing he said, and they won't credit him. And I said, well, at least give the guy credit. He was the first one to talk about that. So I don't. So you have to kind of throw them into whatever. And a lot of people won't go there, but I'm not. I wouldn't. It's not that I won't go to the mob. I just think that the mob wasn't powerful enough, to be. So I don't want any. I don't, really respect any conspiracy theory that has the mob at the heart of it. But I don't automatically dismiss it. So yeah, I think we have to be careful about. We can't say anything is impossible, especially when this crime was never investigated. So we really don't know.
Where can people find your links there, Don?
Well, Substack is the only place I'm not being shadow banned. So that's it's called I Protest Like My Podcast, and that's DonaldJeffries.substack.com. People can subscribe to me there. I have 10 books out there now. The latest is American Memory, All How the Court Historians Promote Disinformation. So people can find that. And it has a lot more about the JFK assassination. And I talked to a couple of witnesses nobody has. I mean, they're peripheral family witnesses, but nobody talked to them. And they just kind of reinforce how big this conspiracy was. But so people can check that out as well.
Don, I'm going to link all your links in the description. It's been a pleasure chatting with you again, man. Thank you for giving me the time. Thank you, everybody, for listening to this episode of Out of the Blank. Make sure you subscribe to Don's work and make sure you check out some more of this ones. Thank you. Have a good day.